Good afternoon. It's Pop again, Dennis Murray. Um, uh, this is Popcast 41, and it's called Part 2 of the Evolution of the Gift of Each Other. I'm going to focus on going back a little bit. Uh, Remember, I said yesterday, but we started talking about something relatively recent, the creation of a theory called attachment yesterday, that we would take things out of sequence. That theory was from 1969. So this book is 20 years old, but it talks about a time beginning 2.5 million years ago. So, okay, we're out of sequence, but this is really important book for beginning the conversation. The evolution of the gifts of each other goes all the way back to the huge changes in the way our ancestor species lived um, as a result of their increasing capacity to be able to figure out the world around them. And they were able to begin using stone tools. And I'm looking at the picture of myself on the TV, on the screen instead of at the camera, which is in the center. So I look like I'm looking askance, and I don't want to. So the the uh, the stone tools caused the capacity to be developed that changed everything about how our ancestor species lived. The capacity was not only could they hunt and kill successfully at a larger, to a larger degree, but that they could then butcher the meat and bring it back to camp and feed the women and children. So that prior to that, a foraging um, species, uh, there was equal work by men and women to do the foraging. But after that, things changed, and um, the changes are elaborate. What Terrence Deacon, the author of this book, The Symbolic Species, the subtitle is The Coevolution of Language and the Brain. What Terrence Deacon is focusing on is that we are a unique species in that we are the only species that uses the symbolic uh, facility for language. And he wants to know how that came about, and it's his lifelong work. He's was a Harvard professor for a while. Now he's at Berkeley, and he's highly well regarded for this book. And he wrote a subsequent book, which is also very interesting. Um, but this book is really big in circles where these things matter. Um, and the part that we're going to focus on today is his subtitle, his subsection on why human societies shouldn't work. And his point is that in bonded pairs, but in a social setting, and that there's an inherent conflict in that. The pair bonds arose from social circumstances derived from the meat and stone tool use, which we'll talk more about at a subsequent days. There's a lot in this book, and it's going to take us days to cover it. But today we're just going to focus on this one thing, why they shouldn't work. So because of this conflict, so people started, well before 2 million years ago, living in bonded pairs in society. Our ancestor species did. And no other species other than modern humans and our ancestor species ever did that. Um, and there's a reason why nobody does that, and it's because those two things conflict. If you want to have male-female bonding for provisioning for the woman and children with the meat from the hunt, then you you want her kept exclusively for your sexual access. If you want community for the benefits of people supporting each other and rearing the children and defending the village while the men are away from predation and other benefits of living socially, those bring men and women into familiarity with each other and into access to each other, which tends to mean that our very strong sexual urges turns out to be much older and much stronger than our pair bonding urges, so that there's a fair amount of pair bond breaking or pair bond harm done as a result of the sociality. So doing the two things together, living in bonded pairs in society, nobody else does. And while there are animals that live as bonded pairs for life, they don't live socially. You know, some ducks, geese live bonded for life, but they don't care if you're a fox taking eggs from the neighbor's nest. They'll defend their nest, but the hell with the neighbor. And wolves, are very, very social, but only the alpha pair mates. Nobody else is allowed to mate. So they don't all live in bonded pairs. There's only one bonded pair, and they do live socially, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When you look hard at each of the species, you discover that we're unique in this capacity. His larger point is, because he's interested in how language evolved, is that that made it necessary for our brains to evolve the capacity for language, because we needed the language to deal with the social life that we had begun to live, which occurred because we had the capacity to hunt and bring meat back to the village. And bringing the women and the children along on the hunt wasn't a good plan. It didn't increase the chance of success. So leaving them behind and butchering the animal with the stone tools and bringing the meat back turned out to be a very good plan. So we ended up with this very unusual way of living as a result of stone tools and hunting. And he describes, a lot about why he feels this is the case, etc. We're going to talk a lot more about it. But the point I'm making is what it leads to is a social species. And he calls us the symbolic species because language is symbolic and nobody else has this kind of symbolism. But we're an extremely social species, and that's part of it. And so essentially, some people say, oh, well, our brains grew large so we could have language. And what he's saying is our psychology is complex and demanded an increasingly evolve a larger brain to be able to accommodate the communications, the symbolic communications that we needed in order to pull off this trick of living together as bonded pairs in society. It's a pretty cool book, I must say. I really paid a lot of attention to it. I've read it a number of times, and I recommend it extremely highly. It made a big difference in my own thinking, and I read it a long time ago, and I'm reading it again now. Okay, so enough for today. It's a fabulous Sunday. I was able to have some of my kids and grandkids and a great grandbaby Lucy in the backyard today for a socially distanced birthday party for my daughter-in-law and my granddaughter-in-law. But the in-law part's not so important to me. They're daughters, and I love them dearly. And it was fun. I got to hold Lucy a little bit. So, okay, enough for today. Thanks. See you tomorrow. Take care. Bye-bye.